Hello, good morning. It's Tuesday, the 19th of March. I always say good morning, which is probably like podcast and radio 101 for bad form, because who knows when people are listening to this, right? So I have no idea if you actually do listen to this in the morning. If you are listening to it in the morning, might I suggest that today's episode, you give it a rest and listen to it in the evening or night? Because we're going to the Kentish Gazette from 1844. And it's just the most bizarre story. It's going to be a little bit different today. It's just one story, and I have no idea. The spirit of the fairy course. In times long ago, one cold November midnight, when all was still around me, save the constant pacing of the watchward at the ancient moat in the dreary park, and the incessant ticking of the clock in the murky loft of the turret high above me, when restless and weary, and irksome all restraint by swathings of cerements and linen cloths, with which my careful attendance has enshrouded me previous to the interment of my mortal remains, I lay ruminating. It was during that brief space, which some conjecture to be allowed in the transition from the sublunary to the celestial world, when suddenly a strange noise broke in upon the holy silence of the spot. A ponderous key turned slowly in the lock, the heavy door, thickly studded with numerous knobs of iron, opened, and I heard the tread of feet ascending the triple greaves at the western entrance to the choir. Presently they halted a brief moment to view that curious relic of Saxon architecture which has outnumbered ages and defied the mouldering hand of time. And all at once the ponderous lid of the huge stone coffin in which I lay was jarred. A monstrous cross was lifted off its surface, and the shell of the said stone coffin, still firmly fixed beneath an arch in the northern wall of the chancel, was torn open, and someone stood before me with looks of desperation and of terror, yet resolute and guilty. Here I lay. I shook, I trembled, as if still within the power of hurt. I was all suspense to know what was next to follow. The intruder seized my body, and tearing open the first envelope of cerement and the swathings of the thin lead, he took out the latter and cast it by. I then began to fear the touch of his unhallowed hands, but I was reserved for much more. He bundled me up like a little load and conveyed me to a mean cottage, such as I have never entered when living, and now, unloosing all my hands, uncoiling all my swathings, he took my body out and laid it carefully in an obscure place. A fire was made for the boiling of the cerecloths. Me he then carried, while it was yet night, tumbled in a sack into another house. I was there received by an ill-looking creature, ashamed to her sex and nature. This monstrous hag, this horrid runyon with one eye, and she once more huddled me into a cold corner, naked and unregarded. My fairy spirit, which now relates the event, yet conscious, and there watched the course. I was nextly, at early day, removed into a lofty garret filled with ancient lumber. There stood the rocking horse of joyous childhood. There lay the gauntlets and the foils of springing youth, and there, on its mouldy sides, hung the falchion, the helmet and the tabard, and curious inscriptions in the queerest characters and hieroglyphics were drawn on the walls and the chimney. I was then stretched unceremoniously on a bloody table, knives and saws, scissors and pincers, single and double hooks, and all the horrid instruments and paraphernalia of dissection were spread upon the mangling board. And all I feared, and even more than I could fear, happened. Like the sculptor or the carver of images, the operator stood over me and viewed me, gazing with a scrutinizing eye. Oh, could your eyes have beheld the spectacle, and witnessed the body of your departed friend, your dearest companion of former days, stretched out and condemned to formal and scientific butchery. How would you have rendered the skies with exclamations, with screams, horrible screams for rescue? But there were none to see, there were none to hear. So quickly began the cruel work. The shining knife was raised, and its gleaming blade was thrust deep into my expanded bosom. My entire body was laid open, my entrails were taken out and drawn forth, and measured and mangled. My head was cut round about, and the bones of my skull sawn clean asunder. My brain, the seat of all my youthful fancies, my fervent hopes and my direful disappointments, exposed. My once beautiful eyes were turned out of their socket, and pricked and laid open, and what is worse, not replaced, but without respect tossed into a box of sand. Nextly, all the flesh on my bones was cut off piecemeal, the skin was raised, and every muscle drawn forth, every nerve put asunder, and every blood vessel held up to view and comment, for the sake of the curious and inquisitive bystanders. Thus was the beauty of the subject, as it was plainly termed, every moment more and more enlarged upon, and I was, in the end, literally cut up into 1,000 morsels. I was stripped to the bone, and my very bones were scraped order to be whitened and preserved, and lastly connected again by flexible joints formed of wires. My bones were saved, it was true, and now perhaps, beneath some bed in a black trunk, lie to the terror and dismay of the fairer inmates the chamber. Melissa, St. Martin's. So, reading that, I'm fairly sure, or semi-sure, that it's a commentary on the practice of medical dissections on cadavers. But I'm not really sure. It's absolutely bizarre. It's quite a fascinating piece. But what's even more utterly perplexing is to why it's just stuffed in the middle of the paper. That is literally just stuffed in between two normal stories with no explanation. And let me know if you think it has any sort of, if you can read the meaning on it, because it's a truly bizarre piece. Anyway, that was yesterday, weirdly. And this is today. Sleep tight, I guess.